Hello, AP students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 6, Learning, and we're going to talk very briefly about operant conditioning. So, how do we learn new behaviors by operant conditioning? Well, anything that's operant is observable, involuntary behavior that an organism emits to. And the operate or on or have an effect on the environment. So, operant conditioning is a form of behavioral learning in which the probability of a response is changed by its consequences, that is, by the stimuli that follows the response. And common rewarding consequences that include things like praise, food, high grades, all of which can encourage behaviors they follow. To a behavioral psychologist, voluntary behaviors are really controlled by rewards and unfortunately punishment, which have no role in classical conditioning. Operant conditioning accounts for a much wider spectrum of behaviors than does maybe classical conditioning, and explains new behaviors, not just reflexive behaviors. So when we talk about operant conditioning, we're talking about those gold stars and stickers and things like that you might have grown accustomed to maybe in an elementary classroom, but they still happen in the adult world. And so we're going to talk about a couple guys. We're going to talk about B.F. Skinner, who is kind of the man who gets a lot of credit for operant conditioning, but his forerunner was a guy named Edward Thorndike, and we're going to mention a few things about Thorndike here. But B.F. Skinner was a founding father of operant conditioning. He based his whole career on the idea that the most powerful influences on behavior are its consequences. And he borrowed the concepts of behavior being controlled by rewards and punishment from another American psychologist who happened to be Edward Thorndike, who had demonstrated how hungry animals would work diligently to solve problems by trial and error to obtain a food reward. And this is what Thorndike called the law of effect. Thorndike, did a lot of his research on cats. And I would imagine he probably had quite a few little puzzles that he designed for these animals, let alone the fact that he worked with some rats. But Thorndike, in the world of education, was very influential as far as kind of bringing this whole idea of rewards into the classroom and having a consequence or a punishment that kind of followed that. So if you would ever study educational psychology, you're probably going to hear more about the works of Thorndike. But Thorndike had a pretty big influence on Skinner and what Skinner is going to do. So the law of effect, this is the idea that the responses that produce desirable results would be learned or stamped into an organism. And Skinner tweaked Thorndike's psychology by getting rid of the subjective and unscientific speculation about the organism's feelings, intentions, or goals, and made it far more, straight up. It's either black or white as far as what the animal's going to do. Skinner refused to consider what happens in an organism's mind. He's obviously a straightforward behavioralist in that respect, because such speculation could not be verified by observations. So if we were going to use operant conditioning on ourselves, what might that look like? And so I'm going to give you some examples. If I wanted to use it, I would probably try to state my goal. So if that is to stop, a behavior that's kind of undesirable, like smoking or eating, or maybe to increase a behavior like maybe studying more or maybe exercising more, I would do this in a way that was in measurable terms, like, how much I want to stop one behavior or how I want to increase the other. Maybe I want to, cut back on how much I smoke. And I state that in the specific terms. Or if I want to study more, how many more minutes I want to study. And I make that intention public. I tell it to someone. So this is to at least make you accountable for some of this. The other is to monitor how you engage in the behavior you wish to either stop or promote. And that might mean keeping a log. A lot of times people who are struggling with eating issues might keep a food log, or you might keep track of how many minutes you study for something, or how many minutes you're exercising. You can follow that with a lot of trackers now. Along with that, you have to do some kind of reinforcement. So how do you reinforce that behavior to increase the amount of study time? You got to allow yourself to have a little reward. So you might give yourself a snack after you study for so many minutes, or maybe rather than the snack, you allow yourself so many minutes maybe on your smartphone. And then finally, reducing the incentives over a period of time. You're going to cut back on the snacks, or cut back the amount of time on the phone, and hopefully develop this new habit. All right. Next time we're together, we're going to talk about reinforcement.